Megaman Legends is definitely one of those games that has a cult following. Its visuals can simply be defined by one word: iconic. I feel like everywhere I go, I see impressions of this game. I always wanted to play this game as a kid since I really liked the NES and SNES Mega Man games, but I sort of skipped the 5th generation of consoles and went straight to the PlayStation 2, so I never got the chance. But recently I corrected that mistake after a viewer had asked me to play it. What I found was definitely one of the most charming games I've ever played. Mega Man Legends, or Rockman Dash as it's known in Japan, was released for the PlayStation in December of 1997. It was produced by the original creator of the series, Keiji Inafune. Legends is definitely a pretty big departure for the series as a whole, being as it's the first 3D Mega Man game. However, 2D Mega Man was very much still in full swing, with 8 coming out in 96 and X4 getting a release in 97. There seemed to be a very big trend at the time trying to get every 2D franchise imaginable to go over to 3D. Super Mario 64 is definitely the game that everyone points to as an example of this conversion going well, but at the time it was a real roll of the dice if your favorite franchise would be completely murdered or just stuck in development hell. Since 2D Mega Man games were still popular, my guess is that Capcom decided that a spin-off would be a much less risky venture. Before going too deep into my thoughts on this game, it's inevitable that Mega Man 64 will get brought up. For this review, I mostly played the original PlayStation release, but I did dip my toes into Mega Man 64 for the sake of this video. Released nearly 3 years after the PlayStation version, Mega Man 64 is nearly identical in terms of content, but it differs in 3 major areas: sound, visuals, and controls. Sound is probably the most notable change. In order to fit everything on a cartridge, all the voice samples are really compressed.
I had some engine problems, and...
It's okay, Roll. But I'm glad you showed up when you did.
I had some engine problems, and...
It's okay, Roll. But I'm glad you showed up when you did.
If I hadn't started on the PS1, this probably wouldn't have bothered me as much, but it's really rough when I know what everything should sound like. Thankfully, the music isn't as affected. However, you do miss out on the sweet CD samples in the music store if you play on the 64. Bars.
But I'm not a rapper.
The visuals are the other thing that's really apparent. I describe the PlayStation release as a lot more sharp, although having a bit less fidelity. The N64's anti-aliasing filter really softens up the image, and I'm not a fan. In the process of researching this video, I learned of a way to remove some of the anti-aliasing through an IPS patch on an EverDrive. The difference is really subtle, but I don't think it's really enough for me to give the N64 the edge here. Also, for some reason, the colors seem to pop a lot more on the PS1. Lastly, the controls. There's no real way around this. The controls are going to feel really foreign to modern gamers for 2 reasons. First is that on the PlayStation, Mega Man Legends was released 8 months after the dual analog controller, so it wasn't developed to use analog sticks. The other issue is that 3D games were still finding their sea legs, and 3D running guns weren't really all that common. The biggest example that I can think of at the time would be Tomb Raider, which ends up pretty much having a similar vibe. 10 controls plus buttons to strafe. My guess is most devs didn't feel comfortable using the right stick camera until the next generation, when it was guaranteed the stock controller had 2 sticks. This brings us back to version differences. The biggest one has to do with the N64 having an analog stick. However, the Nintendo controller is also missing a shoulder button. To get around this, lock-on is handled by pressing down both of the shoulder buttons instead of pressing R2. Speaking of shoulder buttons, they can be either assigned the strafing or rotation function. N64 defaults to strafing, where the PS1 defaults to rotating, but you can change these in the menu at any time. I guarantee you, if you stick with this game long enough, you will get used to it, especially if you're a tank control veteran. But this reliance on the shoulder buttons will hurt your hand. I usually had to take a break during most of the bosses. I haven't played the sequel, but I'm hoping that it defaults to something that's a lot less arthritis-inducing. With all of that being said, I definitely prefer the PlayStation version, but I think these differences come down to personal preference. I don't think you can go wrong with either version of the game if you're going to play it. The story is pretty interesting. Apparently, the Earth has been flooded and people go into ancient ruins in search of energy crystals called refractors. These ruins are protected by reaver bots that will attack on sight. There are rumors, however, of a motherlode, a refractor so big you could power everything for a really long time. In this game, Megaman is a 14-year-old digger who's a crew member of the Flutter, along with Roll, her dad Barrel, and the monkey Data. You've probably seen Data on a billion videos and other stuff doing his signature Data dance. The Flutter crew crash lands on Cadillac's island after engine problem. They decide to dig on the island, but the Bond family has a similar idea. Tron, Diesel, and Bon are the main antagonists, but they have more of a Saturday morning cartoon vibe in that they aren't really evil, just kind of selfish.
Of course, if you agree to become one of my servants, I suppose I could forgive you. What do you say? That way my brother will never have to know about what you did to us.
Join up with pirates? I don't think so.
All right then, forget you. Fine, see if I care. I gave you a chance and you turned it down. Don't come back crying to me later. Your history! You're toast! Just you wait!
There's so many funny moments with these characters, and overall I pretty much love the entire cast. Speaking of characters, in a really forward-looking decision, pretty much every main character is voiced, and it's really great. Again, it's very Saturday morning cartoon, but I feel like the voice acting fits it perfectly.
All hands! Abandon ship!
Some people think they say
Megaman.
too much, but it really didn't get on my nerves. The music is also really great. In the town areas, there's a really nice breezy atmosphere. I especially like the theme for the Flutter. Bosses and cutscenes usually take more of an orchestral route, and it definitely fits. One interesting bit of trivia is that this soundtrack was composed by Makoto Tomozawa, who also worked on the Resident Evil soundtrack. If you're playing on the PlayStation version, definitely make sure to check out the music shop I mentioned earlier. It's really fun to see all the extra tracks. The heavy metal one makes me laugh because I don't think they use guitar in the rest of the soundtrack at all. Generally, I had a great time with this game after getting used to the controls. While most enemies weren't too bad, I died to the bosses a couple of times, usually. However, the general strategy is to circle around the boss and fire. Some of the later bosses I actually needed to take breaks due to my hands hurting, but it wasn't too bad. What was annoying is that when enemies die and drop stuff, you have a very limited time to pick these things up, and you have to walk over the items exactly. I wish I either had more time, or the pickup radius was just bigger. I also wish special weapons were a bit cooler and more useful. I found myself ignoring them for most of the game, and the price for upgrading them to the max at the end of the game is really crazy. If you want to max everything out, you're going to be grinding, which I had no interest in doing. While I really enjoyed this game, I find it hard to recommend, especially to people who just straight up hate tank controls. But if you're a seasoned early 3D gamer, you have to check this one out. Thanks for watching, I'll see you around.